Naam, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Nabiyyina Muhammad. It's your brother Amir, and I'd like to welcome you to a very exclusive and very important episode of Perspective Podcast. My guest, my dear brother in Islam, and a strong advocate, not only for, humanitarian rights, civil rights, anything that deals with any form of oppression or injustice. It is incumbent upon us as men to take to the stage and combat that which is displeasing to the one who created us and provided rights for all mankind and all of creation. With no further delay, someone that I hold very dear and very high in respect, my brother, Marc Lamont Hill.
It's good to see you, my brother. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So you already know, and we discussed this offline a little bit. This has been a very life-changing experience this past couple of months. If I believe anybody who possesses any type of humanitarian spirit or has any respect or appreciation for the welfare of human beings and just the welfare of human life, Coming out of the streets of New York, I witnessed a lot of things in my life. A lot of things that I wasn't proud of, things I experienced that still to this day, has some type of tumultuous, effect on my life, but I've never in my entire life witnessed what I've been witnessing this past month in the affair of the Palestinian people and the oppression and just the brutalization that's been consistent and unwavering for the past 4 weeks now.
Yeah.
And reason why I say this episode is important to me because I believe that first and foremost, those of us that have platforms, this is our voices. This is the opportunity for us to utilize these platforms to impact the lives of those who are inclined to what we put forth on these platforms. And to some degree, I honestly believe it's an obligation.
I agree.
Some may beg to differ, though. But for me, I believe for us to have this opportunity to have these platforms and be able to utilize these platforms to educate first and foremost. You know what I'm saying? Because even in Islam, there's a statement from a famous scholar that said, Al-ilmu qabla qawli wal amal. Knowledge precedes speech and actions. So that means that no one should speak or perform an action without sound knowledge, And that is something that is incumbent upon all of us to implement, not just the Muslims, just mankind. So, I want to dive right into, first and foremost, may Allah reward you and continue to protect you and bestow His mercy and favor upon you because you have inspired me in ways that, I truly find to be something that if people haven't yet been able to grasp your efforts and how you've stood firm on certain, principles and values that you have, I hope that somewhere down the line, they're able to look back and say, he was one of those who chose to use his voice, use his platform, to reshape the narrative. So with that being said, I would like to delve straight into just the whole journalistic perspective.
My brother, it's such an interesting moment. I have a lot of titles: activist, organizer, scholar, but I take the title of journalist serious. And the reason is because in any democracy, you need a media to hold people accountable.
Absolutely.
Without a media, then the people in power get to tell their own story. Or if the people in power own the media, like in some countries, we'll see the state own the media.
Absolutely.
So then everything that come out the media says the state is right.
Yeah.
That can't be how it works. It has to be an independent, free media to tell the truth. The problem with corporate media in a capitalist society is that even though no one owns it, the state doesn't own it per se, the companies are beholden to the people in power. They're beholden to the government to have the government's narrative because they want benefits from the government. They want favors from the government.
Yeah.
They want insight from the government. And so when you have all of these branches of government and all of these arms, the church, the state, the media, if they're all in collaboration with each other too much, there's no space for the truth.
Yeah.
My job is to always tell the truth. And I think it means for me that when I go onto the media, when I go onto my platform, when I go on TV, whatever I do, I have to go on assuming that it's my last day.
Absolutely.
When I worked at CNN, people be like, yo, you ain't afraid to say that? I'm like, nah, I go on TV every single day assuming I'm going to get fired tomorrow. Not because I did nothing wrong. I ain't never steal no money. I ain't never harassed nobody. I ain't never fight nobody. None of that.
Yeah.
But because I'm going to say something that is going to upset people in power, and they're going to say, I can't pay you to undermine my authority and power.
Speaking of CNN, that's one of the things that definitely put you on my radar because of course we always had someone who we thought reflected our best interests.
That was my goal.
Every now and then speaking on behalf of some of the issues that directly impact us.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of times those particular individuals that we held to that particular status kind of play ball, opposed to, as you said, living and dying by what you believe in that moment, and just pushing forward regardless of the result, the consequences, whatever the case may be. Yeah. So, like I said, that's what inspired me. So, when you talk about what transpired in your career with CNN, I think a lot of people don't really understand, at least from our culture, why was that so pinnacle opposed to you speaking about something that may have only directly impacted us as black people, opposed to you taking a stand that actually impacts us all?
Right. I think that's a great question. Black people in this country are disposable. They will use us. They will take our labor. They will throw us away when they don't need us anymore. You see that disposability in sports. Yeah. You a star, they love you till you lose your first step, then it's a wrap, right? It's stunning to watch, man. But we see it since the slave plantations. Black people didn't get killed during slavery. The lynchings didn't start till after slavery ended. You didn't lynch us during slavery because we were property.
Exactly.
It's like blowing up your own car, right? We were property. But once we couldn't do that, then it became, how can we extract labor from them? How can we extract resources from them? And then how can we throw them away, right? So that disposability means that when black people die in Chicago, nobody cares.
Yeah.
We don't even report it half the time.
Yeah.
Right? Or if we report it, the story is, oh, that's just what happens there.
Yeah.
If I report a famine in Africa, oh, that's just what they do, right? Yeah. If I report a bombing in Lebanon, oh my God, that's what Arabs and Muslims and brown people do. They just blow things up. So there's not an outrage about it. The response is different. And if I push back or we have a battle over it, the stakes aren't but so high because we're just talking about people who the world don't care about that much, you know? But when you stand up and say, I'm going to speak out against multinational corporations, I'm going to speak out against capitalism. Now the stakes are high, right? I'm going to speak out against imperialism. I'm going to talk about these wars and how the money is connected to the wars. Gil Scott-Heron, last poet, said, everybody love peace. Problem is you can't make no money off of it.
Wow.
Right? So when the defense industry makes billions off of a war in Ukraine, then you start to see the relationship between the money and the policy. If you point that out, now you're vulnerable because the stakes are too high.
Yeah.
saying I mourn the lives of Ukrainians. That's cool. We should mourn the lives of Ukrainians.
Absolutely.
But that's not a high stakes choice. That's like kissing a baby. Everybody agrees, right? It's a political move.
Absolutely.
But talking about the power and the money behind Ukraine, that's something else. And not just Ukraine. You can talk about any war in the world, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's making money off of it.
Absolutely.
And so when the question of Israel-Palestine comes up, it's a hot button issue. Everybody has a stake in it in some form or fashion for different reasons. But it goes back to the question of what it means to question power, to question imperialism, to question major decisions that are being made by the United States, by Israel, by Saudi Arabia, by Jordan, by Egypt. There's so many stakeholders that we have to talk about and think about. And so when I stood up at the United Nations, of all places,
That's a grand stage there.
yeah, man, and I'm sure the network didn't love that I took an anti-Zionist position on CNN. They didn't call me too much to talk about this issue, right? I got a graduate degree in Middle Eastern Studies. I've been doing research and work in the Middle East for years in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
I've literally been in Masjid al-Aqsa when it's been raided, and I haven't been asked to talk about it. So this is how, because it's like, but what will you say, right? And do I challenge the orthodoxy? Just like I challenge the orthodoxy of gun control. I challenge the orthodoxy of maybe reproductive justice. I challenge the whatever the thing is. There's usually one or two positions, and if I say, well, it's neither this or this, it's actually more complicated. Let's have the complicated conversation. Companies don't like complicated. They want pro wrestling. Good guy, bad guy, somebody wins.
Yeah.
So when I said the United Nations at the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people and said, we're violating human rights everywhere. And when I say we, I mean the United States, because our tax dollars fund it.
Absolutely.
And we got to do something about it. As somebody, as you said, we have to stand in solidarity because it's the right thing to do. It's our duty.
Absolutely.
Right? And I can't promote a system of hierarchy. Right? The Prophet ﷺ says, we cannot, that he who is greater amongst you is greater of you because of what? Taqwa, right? Of piety.
Piety, yeah.
Not white over black.
Absolutely.
Right? Not black over white.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so if we take it out of the black-white paradigm in the United States, it means I can't promote you as Muslim over Jew, Jew over Muslim as a system and say that that's okay. And so when I see people in Israel and Palestine being treated differently based on whether or not they're Palestinian or not, based on whether they have the identity of Jew or Arab or Druze or whatever the thing is, I'm saying this is a system of hierarchy that we have to do something about.
Absolutely.
But the problem is, when you create a system of justice, those who are benefiting from injustice are going to resist. And a lot of them are going to feel like they're being mistreated. You see it in the United States. Let two black people get a job. Oh my God, they're taking all the jobs.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, nah, bro, it's two people now.
Yeah,
Job.
two people,
There's still 48 of y'all.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But the idea is that if we start to create justice, and we start to balance the scales, the people who have benefited from imbalance for so long, they've normalized that imbalance.
Absolutely.
And think that it's theirs.
Yeah.
We have a duty to protect the most vulnerable in our society.
Absolutely.
Jewish people have been subjected to all kinds of violence
Absolutely.
throughout history. We don't got to look to the Holocaust. We should. That's an evil, awful, awful human event. But before the Holocaust, Jews were subjected to pogroms. They were subjected to murder, false accusations, slander, lies, the Dreyfus Affair in France, the Inquisitions in Spain. We could go through our history, and there's been so many moments. We have to create space to protect our Jewish brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
At the same time, we cannot create a system of hierarchy that then marginalizes other folk. We got to be able to do both. We got to be able to protect Jewish people and protect the Muslims, protect Jews and protect Arabs, protect Jews and protect Christians.
Yeah.
And that's all I was trying to do. At the end of that speech, though, I said, free Palestine from the river to the sea.
Yeah.
Now, for me,
That's like a meme now.
yeah. And it's crazy because when I said it because I believe that Palestine and Palestinians should have justice no matter where they live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Just like if in America, we say from sea to shining sea.
Yeah.
It don't mean I'm trying to kill anybody.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I want harm to happen to anybody. I don't. Let me be clear. I'm not speaking hypothetically. I do not want harm to happen to anybody. I simply want Palestinians to be free inside of Israel, Palestinians to be free in the West Bank, I want Palestinians to be free in Gaza, I want Palestinians to be free wherever they are. And for me, that is a moral obligation, you know. And the media spun it, which takes it back to your first point, that I was calling for destruction. I was echoing Hamas. And then everybody said, oh my God, he echoed Hamas. No, 99.9% of people don't even know who Hamas is, right? But suddenly they heard somebody say it, so now it must be true. And that's how our media culture works now. We see it on a meme, it must be true. Somebody puts it on a chart. I saw a meme maybe 3 or 4 years ago of me, of all the things that were wrong with me, right? The right wingers that put out. I got kicked out of Howard for smoking crack. It's not even selling crack, smoking crack, right? They couldn't even give me selling crack. They gave me smoking crack, right? By the way, I didn't go to Howard, right? But it's like, it doesn't matter, right? It was on a chart. And so people were like, that's why you got kicked out of Howard for smoking crack. I'm like, I've never smoked crack. And I've never been to Howard, right? And they had like 4 or 5 things like that. But because they position it a certain way, we're trained to think it's true. If a white guy with a tie is sitting behind a desk, we think it's news. Not opinion, not anything else, but news, because it's a white guy behind a desk at 8 o'clock. If it's on a website, it could be a blog, but we confuse it as a news article. It's a blog. It's just somebody's opinion. My point is, we don't have the media literacy to understand how to interpret and how to make decisions about what's true or what's not. Right? I mean, we used to see this in the hip hop game. You do a good battle rap. You could, I mean, well, was Jay-Z really running? You know what I mean? Like, was he really running in Nas' house? You know what I mean? Like, exactly. Probably not, right? The dates don't add up, right? But Ether's a great song. But if you say the right things in the right tone with the right level of seriousness, people will buy it. Right delivery. People will buy it. I mean, I'll give you one more quick example. Our dear brother Malcolm X, Hajj Malik Shabazz. When he tells the story of the house slave and the field slave, he told it with such power and analysis that people now say it like it's a historical truth. Now, that's not really how slave plantation politics work. And you didn't want to be in the house. The house meant you were close to the master. House meant you were more likely to get sexually assaulted. House meant you had to work at 3 in the morning.
Or be the recipient of some type of knee-jerk reaction.
Exactly. There's nothing great about the house, right? And it wasn't just divided by color. But again, Malcolm told the story in a way that we made it believable, right? Willie Lynch letter. I own a whole bookstore. And people come here and want to buy the Willie Lynch letter. Willie Lynch letter never really happened. But if we tell the story in a certain way, people buy it. And we've told the story of Israel in a way that makes people believe, one, that Israel was founded after the Holocaust, which is not true. The first Zionist integration begins in 1882, about decades before Hitler rises to power. Again, Jews needed protection in the 19th century, but it wasn't created out of the Holocaust, right? We created the narrative that it was a land without a people, and it wasn't. Arabs been there forever. Palestinians been there for thousands of years. Palestinian Arabs, Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and Jews have been there, right? The idea that this was the province of one religion is not true. Yes, the first temple was built, it was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed, right, for our Jewish brothers and sisters. The Church of the Sepulchre is there. You know, the Stations of the Cross are there. The Via Dolorosa is there. Masjid al-Aqsa is there. For Muslims, that's the third holiest mosque in Islam, and it's the first Qibla. Right? It's the first praying direction. So the stakes are high for everybody. Right? But we don't tell that story. And people don't know enough to understand that that's not okay, right? And so my job is to tell the truth and to say, yes, we need to protect our Jewish brothers and sisters. We also can't take people's land. And we can hold both of those truths at the same time. But in the media, because we're not media trained and because we accept all the things that the world tells us, when I make that claim, just River to the Sea, Palestine will be free. And again, I'm calling for nonviolence. I was calling for justice. I was calling for coexistence. Nobody heard any of that. And so the next day I get fired. And
Now, how was that? I mean, like,
it was rough, man.
we all know the outcome, but I'm just saying, like, I think people don't understand, like, what actually transpired. It's like, was it a call? Like,
It was a call. It was a call at 11 o'clock in the morning, bro.
Your services are no longer needed.
Literally. I mean, it's like it sounds like you wrote it. Like, you know the business because it's like you understand it. The calls don't be that different, right?
Yeah.
They called me and told me that they could they had to terminate my employment with CNN, and they said that my speech at the United Nations did not reflect their values. I said, well, which part?
Wow.
They said, well, we can't get into specifics. I said, well, what did I say?
That's it. That was just a collective decision.
They just kept saying it doesn't respect our values. It's clear a lawyer told them to keep saying that.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect our values. Because they didn't want to say too much because, that's how lawsuits happen.
Absolutely.
They paid me to the end of my contract. Couldn't ask for anything other than that. And I left,
So, just to expound on what you said, because, I grew up, like, my grandfather was an avid watcher of CNN, an avid reader of the New York Times. And at the time, this was the only supposed source of information.
Mm-hmm.
I actually grew up, I grew up understanding that. And it doesn't matter what dynamic of trial or adversity ever emerged, it was just programmed that that's our source. Mm-hmm. If you want to know anything about what's going on, those are your sources.
Yeah.
And if you think about how categorically is established, is like, if you're not really an avid reader, you read like USA Today because it's color coded, it's real,
It's
like
short.
simple. Yeah,
that's why they put outside the hotel rooms.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you on the road, you see it.
Daily news.
Yeah.
They give you a little bit, but not everything. New York Times, a little bit more intricate, Washington Post, so on and so forth. So it's like, I've always looked at the media and the consistency of how the narrative is controlled. It's kind of like, not only you being programmed, but you're actually being kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You're actually being kidnapped because it's like, this is against my will. I have nowhere else to turn. You know what I'm saying? I can't free myself from the fact that this is the only source that I'm able to extract from. So now, as time goes on, we've learned through certain adversities that have transpired, like 9/11 and other things that made people a little bit more inquisitive, a little bit more, lot more inquiries and questioning.
Yeah.
To the avail of figuring out, like, okay, this source is corrupted. But because it's the only game in town, now I'm like a victim of Stockholm Syndrome. I have no choice but to love my kidnapper.
Right.
I don't have nowhere else to go.
Right. So we keep going back to the same source.
Yeah, you got to go back to the same source. And then you got to try to, like, sift through it. Use some type of alternative method now to kind of decode and try to understand underlying meaning. Maybe what they're trying to say is this, but I'm still kind of subjected to the same source. So I think that now with the issue in Palestine, an occupation of Palestine, and that the narrative has been controlled now by the victims, not the kidnapper anymore.
Yeah.
The victims are telling the story.
Right. It's changing the game.
It's changing the game, And what's crazy about it is that with the monopolization of those mass media platforms, they can't counter the truth fast enough.
Right.
It's like the truth is like so many steps or moves ahead. It's like they can't counter it fast enough. So now what you're seeing is them just resorting to just pure arrogance. Mm-hmm. Like, basically, okay, you got us. This is what it is. And it starts to sound like that call you got.
Right.
Just that repetitive stance on.
Yep. Just like, no.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, maybe we might be lying. So it don't matter.
Yeah.
We still gonna do it.
Exactly. So, what is your, stance on that, and how could you clarify that for people who are not really seeing?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would ask people to do is take a step back and just consume other media. Mm-hmm. If you consume other media, then you don't have to trust you or me to be making an honest case for how this is not the truth. You can see for yourself.
Absolutely.
We were on the streets of Ferguson. I remember August of 2014. We were on the streets of Ferguson, and I remember when they started tear gassing us. And I'm tweeting, you know, tear gas is coming. They said, you know, they'll smoke bomb. They said we had 15 minutes to leave. They said we'll send a warning 5 minutes before, and about maybe 10 minutes before. I don't remember exactly. Tear gas came. No warning.
Yeah.
I'm tweeting.
The 5 minutes was the warning and the ticket.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And they, when I say they, I mean the major. Well, I tweeted it, and the major media outlets were saying something different. And I know because when I would tweet, people were tweeting back. I saw later, you lying. CNN is reporting, or CBS is reporting, or MSNBC is reporting that those are smoke bombs, not tear gas. Anybody who's been tear gas know they've been tear gas. You don't ever confuse tear gas with nothing else, right? There's nothing else like tear gas. I've been tear gas in multiple countries. It's tear gas, right? And but people assume that what the media outlet said had to be true, and that what I was saying on the ground, actually getting tear gassed, could not be true.
Could not be. Yes.
There's no way to get people to unlearn that, except either to get tear gassed, right? Which I don't want people to have to experience, right? Because until it happens to you in the media's line, you know, you may not trust it, or to consume outside media and to start corroborating the evidence yourself, right? Because independent media, Democracy Now! Was reporting tear gas. Al Jazeera and BBC were reporting tear gas. People all over the world were reporting tear gas, just not the major corporate American media outlets. So if you take a step back and consume all of it, you start saying, well, why are they saying this and they saying that? And who has an investment in this being the truth versus that being the truth? It doesn't mean that corporate media is always wrong, and it doesn't mean that international media is always right or independent media is always correct. But it does mean that we have to at least analyze and make decisions based on our analysis. And that's the key.
That's the thing. That's so disheartening, because it's like you're forced to kind of configure everything, which ultimately may be more to your inclination. You know what I'm saying? Opposed to, once again, what may be actually true. So that means if I want to believe that it was tear gas, then it's tear gas. Or I want to believe that was just smoke. Because I didn't see any reaction to tear gas.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Because of edits and stuff like that.
And it fits the scriptures in your brain.
Exactly.
So when they tell you, when the police, when we were growing up, and Rodney King is getting beat, and we're watching it with our eyes, and they're still telling us, well, you know, he was on PCP, and you know PCP. I know a lot of Negroes on PCPs. I don't care. You ain't beating 5 cops with guns and sticks. I don't care how much wet is in your blunt. I don't care how much. I don't care whatever. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? But to the white person who already has an investment in believing in a white supremacist narrative of black people, and they believe, well, if they hadn't beaten them for that long with all those officers, then he would have gotten up, beat the officers, and run through LA killing and raping and pillaging, right? And so the media story, which didn't make any sense, corroborated a police story that didn't make any sense, because white supremacy don't make any sense. So you wanted to believe it's true, so you needed to believe it's true. Just like you're saying, the people needed to believe that our police, who we believe protect and serve us, I don't want to believe that they're tear gassing people when they tell us that they're, you know, I can't believe that, because then if that's true, then all this other stuff I believe falls apart. And if all this other stuff falls apart, then who am I?
Exactly.
Right? And that's as a white person, as a rich person, as a male, as all these things, right? Whatever identity or whatever role we have in society or in the world that is one of domination and power, we have to then confront that. And start saying, well, wait a minute, if that's true, then maybe I didn't earn this. Maybe I'm not that awesome. Maybe my whiteness may have something to do with this. Maybe the reason police don't shoot me is not because I'm so well behaved and I'm more articulate when they pull me over. Maybe they actually treat black people different.
Absolutely.
You know, so you start to think about these things differently, and once you start accepting that, then the rest of it falls apart. Well, maybe black people aren't lazy. Maybe they're not getting jobs because of white supremacy. Maybe I do have some privilege that's unmerited, and maybe that means I need to give something back. And no reparations. Oh my God! Right. So you end up in these places you don't want to be.
Exactly.
You don't want to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're invested in believing a lie, because a lie is so much more compelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the media will reinforce that lie. The media will tell that lie to you, for you, all day, every day. And the more money there is in the lie, whatever it is, the more money there is in the lie, the more people who will, use all of their effort, all of their energy into normalizing the lie. They'll make studies about the lie. They'll create institutions about the lie. They'll create pop culture, a whole curriculum about the lie.
Yeah.
They'll do all of it to make the lie the center of our world.
Yes.
And so then the person that says, well, wait a minute, that's not true. We got to do something with that person. Yeah. Right? Now, history might redeem you. Our dear sister, Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman out of Michigan, serves the Detroit district, Palestinian American woman, first Muslimah in Congress, along with Ilhan Omar. She was just censured by the Congress yesterday. The 26th person in the history of the United States to get a formal censure, a formal reprimand from Congress for saying from the river to the sea. That's what put it in perspective. 26 people in the history of the U.S. Congress have been censured. The Congress has had Klan leaders, racists, white supremacists, child molesters, killers. Almost none of them have been censured. Last week, they had a congressman who said that there are no Palestinian civilians, meaning you can kill them all. He wasn't censured. But Rashida Tlaib was censured, right? For telling the truth. But because the lie has become compelling, and the lie is that Palestinians don't have a right to defend themselves. The lie is Palestinians aren't people. They're disposable, that their babies aren't worth as much as other people's babies, right? This is the lie, but we've normalized the lie. So when she says free this land, she gets censured. And she's the 26th person in the history of this country to get censured. You know what the second one was?
Oh.
A man who stood up against slavery.
Wow.
A slave ship had been turned around.
So that means the time span between that censorship to what took place.
Right. You're talking about hundreds of years and only 25 people. But also think about what it means for the country to have done the same reprimand to somebody who stood up and said slavery is wrong.
Yeah.
Now somebody's saying this occupation is wrong. Right? So we don't have a good track record of censuring the right people either.
Yeah.
Right? Congressman Byrd wasn't censured. He was a Klan leader.
Yeah.
Right? So out of Virginia. So all that to say, we make laws, media, all the things around the lie.
Yeah.
My job, your job, everybody's job is to tell the truth. As the prophet would say, even when it is bitter.
Even when it's bitter, yeah. Even if it's against you.
Even if it's against you.
Yeah.
And that can be difficult. But that's our job. That's our calling.
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to do. Right? And so, I don't know how to do that work of spotlighting the truth and make people feel comfortable.
Yeah, see, that's that balancing act. Yeah, that balancing act right there actually compromises the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So even in the Quran, Allah says, "Oh, you who believe, fear Allah, always speak a word of truth."
Mm-hmm.
So the governance of telling the truth is the fact that you have an all-hearing, all-knowing, sublime, creator of the heavens, earth, and everything in between, aware of every statement that resides in the heart, everyone that leaves your mouth. So the governance is fear Allah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then always speak the truth.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. That should make you fear less.
That should, yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying? Because now it's like, okay, I'm not concerned about the recipient of this truth. I'm more concerned about the one who's going to judge me for this truth.
Right.
You understand?
Right.
So, in light of that, I think it's becoming abundantly clear what the truth is. And as you go through the formality, for many of those who have spoken out against the occupation of Palestine, the genocide in Palestine, because all of these terms are valid now. I think,
absolutely.
yeah, all of this stuff, you know what I'm saying? But my question now is, being that this truth has outweighed the lie, now, in order to establish rectification,
Mm-hmm.
the narrative now is international law.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So now it becomes this kind of fork in the road now. We've hit this speed bump. We hit this stump now. Like, okay, now that we've got through that formality, what's on the table now is how do we govern ourselves or attempt to govern ourselves based upon the atrocities that's taking place? What's on the table now is international law. So now that is also this truth has outweighed the lie of violations of international law.
Right. And there's so many.
And the sad part for me is because I heard stories as a young black male. We never witnessed any of these things during Jim Crow, none of that. We've heard stories. We've seen pictures. We've actually went into Schomburg Library and certain places where these truths are graphic and tangible. And we've seen that people can actually, or have actually been hung from trees, dragged on pickup trucks, just done dirty, right? So now that this becomes abundantly clear to us, and this truth outweighs the lie, my thing is, how potent is international law, and how does this become the source of rectification for what's taking place in Palestine? Because now that
it's a good question.
It's a
great question.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, it's a great question, brother. The law is only as good as our commitment to respecting it and enforcing it, right? Because we don't need international law to know a genocide when we see one. But the idea was that international law would police our collective behavior so that we never went too far off the map. After World War I, the League of Nations was formed, which would eventually become the United Nations. And the idea was that if we had nations and nation states and we had borders and territories and boundaries, and we eliminated the pre-World War I mindset that might made right, that if I beat you in a war, I could take your stuff.
Yeah.
Right? The idea was you can't win a war and take people's stuff. Land acquisition by force became illegal.
Yeah.
And so, for the most part, that is proven, right? You know, people don't just take people's stuff anymore. Yeah. It ain't like the old Ottoman empires or British empires. We just went through Africa and took everything. But empire going empire, right? So they found new ways to do it. Yeah. They have neo-colonial ways of doing it. They found loopholes, or they occupy, or they create mandates and mandatories and systems and protectorates and all these other things. But my point is, international law at least gave us a language to say this isn't okay. You can't just go and take the West Bank and keep it, occupy it indefinitely. You can't just say, well, you know, Israel won the 1967 war, therefore, you know, Ramallah is ours, or Beirut or Bethlehem is ours. You can't just go and take stuff. Yeah, that was the idea. East Jerusalem, you can't just say, well, you know, we won the war, so now that's all ours. Now Masjid al-Aqsa and Wailing Wall and Church of the Sepulchre, Church of Knesset Qiyamah, it's all ours now. Like, nah, it don't work that way. But international law is helpful for giving us the language, right? International law says you can't be disproportionate in force, right? In other words, you can defend yourself, but you can't over defend yourself. In other words, there has to be a legitimate military objective. I can't just kill thousands of people because a rocket hit us. I'm not saying that's what happened on October 7th. I'm speaking in general terms right now. You can't just do that, right? And civilians can't be harmed. Yeah. Now, in Islam, there's always been language and rules that made it clear that we can't retaliate against children and women and the vulnerable.
Non-combatants.
Right? Yeah, non-combatants. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. And that's always been there. But international law, in some ways, is catching up to that, right? As was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So there's a way that the law gives us a framework for saying that's wrong and that can't be done, and here's why. And it's a shared language and a shared vision. But what you often see is countries like the United States saying, well, yeah, but we're the exception. Oh, yeah, we need a Rome statute. We need an international criminal court. But you know what? Y'all not going to try us on it. Try Africa on it. Yeah, that's fine. Right? And that's basically what ends up happening, right? We might as well call it the ACC, the African Criminal Court. It ain't the International Criminal Court, because you'll never see America in there. You'll never see, you know what I mean? You'll never see the West in there in general. France don't be in there like that, you know. So I'm saying all that to say it gives us the language, it gives us the framework, but if we don't have the political will, you can have all the rules, all the contracts, all the laws. At the end of the day, that's helpful, and it gives us a mechanism to fight and struggle and to organize people. Because I can say to people, well, look, they violated these 5 laws. They violated these 3 rules of the Geneva Convention. They violated the Hague here. They violated this here, that there. By giving people a language, everyday people could be like, oh, it's not just that you don't like it, it's actually illegal. Okay, cool. We can organize around that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the framework for justice will not come because our oppressors say, oh, I didn't realize it was illegal, I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen, right? At the end of the day, we need to create a movement and apply pressure. I'm not talking about violence right now. I'm talking about pressure.
I understand.
But I got to say it, because if I don't say it, then what they hear is
the
violence.
Pressure is for accountability.
That's it.
That's the pressure.
That's the pressure.
Pressure is, listen, if you're going to hold us as citizens, taxpayers, all of these conditions that we have to adhere to in order to live in a harmonious fashion,
right?
We have to be held accountable for.
That's it.
Being citizens.
That's it. That's accountability. That's democracy.
My question is, if a government doesn't abide by these same standards, then the definition of what type of government do we live in?
Right. Definitely not a democracy.
Definitely not a democracy.
And that's the problem, right? Because democracy comes from the word demos, the people. If we don't listen to the demos, and we don't respect the will of the demos, then we're not a democracy. But we like to flaunt ourselves as the only democracy or the best democracy, or France is the best democracy, and somehow the problem is, if America's a democracy, but felons can't vote even after they pay their debt to society and they've been rehabilitated, right? If in France it's a democracy, but women can't wear hijab in school, and they call it religious freedom, ironically, or paradoxically maybe, what are you doing here, right? If Israel is a democracy, but there's 60 laws on the books that treat Palestinian citizens of Israel different than Jewish citizens of Israel, then 2 things are true. One of 2 things have to be true. Either you're not a democracy, or you do see yourself as a democracy, but those people catching hell, you don't see as people. You don't see them as demos.
Yeah.
So either you don't see me as a person, or you're openly admitting that you don't think all people should be treated the same. Either way, something got to give.
Yeah.
Something got to give. And that's my job as a journalist, is to point out the contradictions and to take these contradictions and turn them into critical questions. And then take those critical questions and bring them to the lap and the door of the people in power.
Now, for me, I think that process would take so much time to just scratch the surface.
Yeah.
So now, unless you have a contrast to democracy, now this is where, me as a Muslim, me once living in a Muslim country, I lived in Egypt, I've traveled to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Malaysia. A lot of people don't even know Malaysia is a Muslim country.
Yeah.
Indonesia, largest population of Muslims on the planet, but everybody defines the religion of Islam by Arabs.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Not knowing that you have a larger population of Muslims in Africa.
Very much so.
Than you have in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what governs us is the Sharia, right? And this term has become just as taboo as anything else that contradicts democracy.
Yeah.
But if you use it as contrast to how democracy, diplomacy, and all of these terms is being used or utilized, and say, okay, cool, we have plenty of Muslim countries that's governed by the Sharia. Some of it is taboo in regards of Western society standards, but in all actuality, when you look at the end result, these are the most safest places on the planet, right? These are places that not only that this form of governance is put in place by the government itself, but it's something that also resides in the hearts of the individuals who live under it. And I'll give you an example. Like, I lived in Egypt during the Thawra, when they, ousted Mubarak. I was literally living in Egypt at the time.
Wow.
You're talking about a country that didn't have a functioning government for a whole year. You can't even fathom this in the United States of America.
Yeah, no.
Now, just to give you contrast, I also was in New York when they had the blackout. Blackout lasted a couple hours. the amount of crimes and things that took place,
them 3 hours.
in that 3 hours didn't even match. I mean, it exceeded tremendously what may have transpired in the entire country of Egypt without a functioning government for a whole entire year. You're talking about a population of over 100 million. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
People that reside in this country. And for me, that was definitely confirmation that, look, we didn't need a functioning government. What's instilled in us, in our belief system, in our value system, we're able to utilize that to first and foremost govern ourselves. And that kind of snowballs into or segues into complete governance. And once all of that kind of passed and there was another, saying, head figure or whatever put in place, everything kind of reside back to, its normal state. So
yeah,
I think, what I'm getting at is how do we start establishing contrast to what's supposed to be, considered diplomacy? Because we have examples that are there. We have examples that are in place, and it seems like any government that contradicts that, not just the Muslim land, we're talking about North Korea, we're talking about communism. Like, these things are also something that doesn't sit right when it comes to being contrary to what is deemed Western democracy. So
it's a great. This is what I would say. I think that we have to let go of our obsession with narrow Western ideas about what democracy is. I happen to believe that democracy is the way to go, but I don't believe necessarily that the way we understand democracy and what democracy is supposed to be is embodied in America or France or Germany or Israel or wherever, right? I think that Sharia, it's been maligned. I mean, it's now one of those words that they say on Fox News. They say, like, I heard he was at a madrasa, and it's like, I meant that it says a school,
it's
right?
A school, yeah.
Right? But, these words have become signifiers of things.
Absolutely.
So we don't actually have the ability to even create space for a critical conversation about them.
Exactly.
That said, I think Sharia absolutely offers a great deal of insight and possibility for thinking about human interaction, for thinking about this idea of adala or justice, for helping us think about possibilities for how we can interact with one another in different ways.
Yeah.
I would say that the embodiment as a religious state, I don't believe in religious states at all.
Okay.
I don't believe as the organizing framework for a society that is multi-religious. For example, if the United States is run by Sharia and there are Christians and Jews or atheists or secular folk, that's not my vision of what democracy could look like. But that doesn't mean that Sharia doesn't have something to say about how we function differently. In the same way that we say we're non-Christian as a nation, but we smuggle in a whole lot of Christian values, some of which are universal and just Ahl al-Kitab type stuff, and other stuff is very specifically Christian that marginalizes and does harm to people who aren't Christian. So I never want to do harm or create something that is mandatory or compulsory among folk who don't believe as I believe.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the tension for me.
I
That's
understand.
what I'm trying to think through and work through. And in a place like Egypt, it's an interesting idea because while I think, and you were there, I wasn't there. I actually ended up in Tahrir. But I remember thinking after Mubarak was ousted and Morsi comes in, who is obviously Ikhwani's Muslim Brotherhood, there's a very interesting framework that comes up. And under Sisi, who's allegedly more secular, I see a lot of people in prison, a lot of journalists, a lot of freedom fighters. So in both administrations, I see people catching hell. But it's not because they're Muslim. It's not because of the Muslim framework. It's because there's poverty, there's corruption, there's Western influence, extracting and pulling. All this stuff is part of the problem. So I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, they just need some good old American democracy. Yeah. But I'm also not convinced that the cure is, well, we just need to have the state run through Islamic law when there's Coptic Christians and you know what I mean? So that's what I'm struggling with.
But the thing is, like, we go back historically, like you mentioned before, about the coexistence of Muslims, Jews, and Christians in Palestine.
Yeah.
Which was...
But they were secular.
Yeah, but still sustained by, if you go back in history, back to the time of Umar bin Khattab, or you go back to
okay.
Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, there was harmony under Sharia, and not to be framed as there had to be a ruler or ruling party. It's just the idea of, something that is put in place that acknowledges the rights of all living things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
But that's the basis of it.
Right.
Is that these rights are already been prescribed. We can't move them around and re-alter and change them and say, okay, cool, we came up with something better. Because then that would just remove us from the fold of understanding what we upon. But to have a system put in place that acknowledges and understanding the rights of all creation and being just
Yes.
in
that's the
framework.
Key. That's the key.
You know what I'm saying?
Just framework is necessary.
Exactly. So the only way to distort it is the people. It's not the foundation, it's not the structure of it, it's the people. Yeah. Because like you said, what happens is you have other influences creep in. Western society creeps in.
Human nature,
and things of that nature. So, I don't want to hold you because I could do this with you.
We got to build again, bro.
Yeah.
We get into a whole other part. There's a whole other
yeah.
conversation that we need to have.
Yeah,
it's dope.
absolutely.
It's so dope.
I think it's important because, my thing is, in closing, we've got past the whole formality, like I said, of establishing what's true. No matter how much these corporate media platforms want to continue to try to push their narrative. I believe that social media, this generation of young people, and quite frankly, a simple tool, the cell phone.
Word.
Something that we deem to be a distraction at times, and
it can be,
that
yeah.
detours it, and it does that. But in this particular moment, we've watched this simple device narrate the most atrocious, genocidal occupation of a land and its people. And what makes it even more disheartening is that we actually watch doctors performing surgery with the light on this device.
Yeah.
Because of the removal of electricity, water, food, basic necessities that conform with the rights of every human being.
Right.
This is something that is instilled in us as believers. So we got to have a sequel to this.
Oh, we going to.
I just want to say, before we close out, is that it's definitely been an honor for me. I've had several other episodes of this podcast in the pipeline, and I just didn't feel comfortable, putting out anything until I had someone that can help me articulate to the people that follow me and watch me. Just get a brief clarity and understanding of how we need to assess the situation, how we need to internalize and understand what's taking place, and how we should never feel hopeless in aiding and assisting any human being that's suffering from oppression. Because this is something that Allah freed Himself from. Allah freed Himself from oppression. So oppression is something that doesn't reside in our belief system, And in closing, there's a statement that Allah mentioned in the Quran. He said, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas, ta'maruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah." You are the best of people ever raised for mankind, meaning those that believe, because you enjoin that which is good and you forbid that which is evil.
Right.
And you believe in Allah. So my message to, our brothers and sisters in Philistine, all the Muslims around the world, we have to resort back to the basic fundamental principles, of this blessed religion of Islam, and never despair in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To supplicate for your brothers and sisters in Philistine, and never feel hopeless, because the dua is the weapon of the believer. And it's the first weapon that should be drawn.
Right.
Before resorting to emotions, distortions and information and all these things, which trigger statements and actions that may not be conducive to any benefit or any help. We have to first and foremost draw the very first weapon,
Dua.
which is the dua, the supplication to the creator of the heavens and the earth and everything in between, because only by his will that this trial has befell our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and the only one that can remove it is the one that bestowed it. So, Jazakallah khair for coming on the show.
It's been an honor, my brother. I can't wait for part 2.
Part 2 is like immediately.
That's it. That's it.
Yo, and once again, like I said, I appreciate you taking out the time.
Yes, sir, my brother.
I know you've been running the wheels.
Running, man. Running. Well, this is the work, man. This is what we do. It is teaching discipline and patience and all the other things, man. So
anything in closing you want to say?
My brother, just thank you for having me, and may this be the most successful venture you've had as of yet, and you had so many already.
Yeah.
And I look forward to checking out more.
Beautiful. So it's your brother Amir. I want to say, this is definitely, as I mentioned in the beginning, an exclusive and very important episode of Perspective Podcast. Subscribe, like, share, but more importantly, comment. Because I learn from your comments. There's no, tyranny here. There's no narcissism with me. I'm not a person that's immersed in my pride or anything like that. I learn from the people. And this is how I feel I'm able to be a benefit for the people. So, till next time, inshallah. Once again, I want to thank my guest, Marc Lamont Hill. And inshallah, stay tuned to the next episode of the Perspective Podcast. Barakallahu fi wa jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.